Okay. Uh, yeah, so there is an AI note taker that could help you to see the summary of today's lecture, right? So, I mean, that's a new feature. You just added to this Zoom. Uh, we'll see how well it works, right? So I will share the notes to everyone along with the video. Right? I know some of you have already started this exercise class before this lecture. It is not a perfect scheduling because we have not covered enough material last week to finish problem set one, but you probably have already started discussing those problems. But I guess that's just for the first week's exercise class. In the future, you will be able to have the student teacher to cover the questions that you are able to work on, right? But after today's lecture, we'll cover all the materials you need to finish problem set one. And also for the third group, you're lucky that you are able to work on the problem and also along with the student teacher in the exercise class. Right? So before we start, I just want to remind you that even though we are in this online meeting, but you are highly encouraged to ask questions whenever you have anything in mind and you feel anything is unclear. You can either raise your hand or just unmute yourself to speak up, or you can just test your questions in the chat box, right? So that is how this lecture will be going, right? Okay, so let's start and let me just first quickly remind you what we have covered so far. In the previous lecture, we made the introduction to this course and also we defined what economics is. The key word for defining economics is scarcity. Scarcity represents the issue that we always want more than what is available to us. So it represents the tension between desirability and availability, right? And also because of scarcity, because we have limited resources, we have to make a choice. And in other words, we have to make trade-offs, right? It's because any choice would represent a trade-off. Whenever we make a decision, if we choose choice A, then we cannot at the same time choose choice B. So these trade-offs lead us to our definition of cost. And in economics, we define this idea of opportunity cost, right? When any choice imply a sacrifice, meaning that whatever action you take, there will be a cost attached to this action. And opportunity cost is just representing the value of your best alternative, right? You choose choice A, then the best alternative of choice A, choice B, right, has its value. And the value of choice B that you sacrifice, that would be represented as the opportunity cost, right? So I gave some examples, right? So what is the opportunity cost of going to a live concert? It has two components. The things that you cannot afford to buy if you purchase the concert ticket, meaning that you have to pay to get the tickets, right? But at the same time, the money can be used for some other alternatives. And also, it's not only the price you pay, the time you spend to attend the concert also is part of the cost, right? So realizing these costs to any choice is the first step in making a wise economic decision, right? So I give you some examples, right? So like the opportunity cost of using Facebook is not free, even though you don't need to pay to use Facebook, but the time you spend, I mean, that's part of the cost. And also, I give you the example that using coupons, even though you save some money, but the time you spend to collect those coupons and also the time for organizing the coupons and also keep you have to keep yourself constantly when to use the coupon and the extra time you spend in the supermarket that also account for part of the opportunity cost. So again, I'm not saying that it's not worth it to using Facebook, not worth it to using coupon. I just want to keep in mind that there is always a cost for any choice that you make. And later we'll introduce this idea of the comparison between the cost and benefit in order to make sure whether a choice is a good choice for you, right? Before that, I want to show you this really interesting video to demonstrate this idea of opportunity cost. So this is a choice made by Sheldon Cooper in the TV series The Big Bang Theory that nicely illustrates this idea of opportunity cost. Whenever you have to choose something, then you have to give up something else, right? So let me try to start.
First, there was PlayStation, aka PS1. Then there's PS2, PS3, and now PS4. And that makes sense. You'd think after Xbox, there'd be Xbox 2. But no. Next came Xbox 360. And now, after 360, comes Xbox One. Why one? Maybe that's how many seconds of thought they put into naming it.
Can you get the butter, please?
Yeah. However, with the Xbox One, I can control my entire entertainment system using voice commands. Up until now, I've had to use Leonard.
Then get the other one. Pass the butter.
Hang on. I don't feel like you're taking this dilemma seriously.
Fine, Sheldon. You have my undivided attention.
Okay, now, the PS4 is more angular and sleek looking.
No way!
It's true. But the larger size of the Xbox One may keep it from overheating.
Well, you wouldn't want your gaming system to overheat?
No, see, well, you absolutely would not. And furthermore, the Xbox One now comes with a Kinect included.
Included?
Yes. Not sold separately. Although the PS4 uses cool new GDDR5 RAM, while the Xbox One is still using the conventional DDR3 memory.
Why would they still be using DDR3? Are they nuts?
See, that's what I thought. But then they go and throw in an ES RAM buffer.
Oh, wait a second. Who's they?
Xbox.
You're kidding!
No, I am not. And this ES RAM buffer should totally bridge the 100 gigabit per second bandwidth gap between the two RAM types.
This is a nightmare. How will you ever make a decision?
See, I don't know. What should I do?
Please pass the butter! I'm proud of you, Sheldon.
Yeah, I'm proud of me too. I've done all my research, I conducted an informal poll, and I've arrived at the rock-solid certainty I've made the right choice.
Well, that's gotta be a good feeling.
Oh, it is. Although...
Oh, crap.
Now, I had the same feeling when I made my dad buy a Betamax instead of a VHS.
You were just a little kid.
Yeah, a little kid who picked the wrong format to record the McNeil-Lehrer report. I also was certain that HD DVD would win out over Blu-ray.
How old were you then?
Old enough to know better. And now that I think about it, I stood in front of a case of iPods and I bought a Zune.
What's a Zune?
Yep, exactly. It's an MP3 player brought to us by the makers of Xbox.
No, what are you doing? No, pick that back up. You know it's good. You did the research.
But what if I'm wrong?
You know what? How about I buy it for you? How about I buy you both?
You know I only have one slot available on my entertainment center.
Then I'll buy you a new entertainment center.
Yeah, okay, sure. But which one?
How about this? I've heard that if you flip a coin, it will tell you how you actually feel, because you'll either be disappointed or excited by the outcome.
Interesting.
So heads, it's PS4, tails, it's Xbox One.
All right, I'll try.
What is it?
A quarter.
Could have given it back to me. That was a choice.
On the one hand, the Xbox One has a better camera, but the PS4 has a removable hard drive. Thoughts?
I can't feel my legs.
Oh, I'm sorry, guys, but the store closed 5 minutes ago.
But I haven't decided yet.
You have to come back tomorrow. The registers are closed.
Let's get you some food. You'll feel better after you eat.
Okay.
What do you want? Like Thai food, a burger?
I don't
Okay, so this is a very funny video, but I hope that this video illustrates this idea of the difficulties in reaching decisions in some circumstances. Because whenever you have to choose one option, you have to give up all the good features of the other option. For Sheldon, if he chooses PS4, he has to give up all the good features of Xbox One. If he has chosen Xbox One, he has to give up all the good features of PS4, right? It's the same thing like he said that he made a bad decision when choosing between iPod and Zune. And some of you might not even know what Zune is. And later, Sheldon was asked whether she want burger or Thai food, right? So these are all kinds of choices. And all the choices would imply some sacrifice. Because you have to give up some other things that you alternatively will be able to acquire. So I hope this funny video would really give you a deep understanding of the idea of opportunity cost, right? So that is the introduction of what economics is. So economics deal with scarcity, and because of scarcity, you have to face trade-offs and make a choice. And also, because you have to make a choice, that would help us to introduce this concept of opportunity cost. Any choice would imply a sacrifice, and that sacrifice is the cost that we have to pay. Right? Now, we are ready to get some important economic way of thinking. So in the textbook, it covers some interesting ways of thinking, but to be concise, I just want to introduce two most important economic way of thinking. The first thing is that rational choice compare marginal benefits and marginal cost. So we have already introduced this idea of a cost, but in order to make sound and good decisions, we need to compare benefits and cost in order to make so-called rational decision, so-called good decision. Right? So here we will introduce this idea of marginal. We'll see what it means. And then the second economic way of thinking is choices respond to incentives. Right? So we will introduce another concept in economics called incentives. Now, the first economic way of thinking, rational choice compares costs and benefits and achieve the greatest benefit over cost. So in other words, whenever you want to make a choice, we need to consider the corresponding cost and also the corresponding benefits of a certain choice in order to determine whether it is a good decision, a good choice for us, right? So costs represent what you must give up, right? So this is just the idea of opportunity cost that we have just defined. And benefit is what you gain, right? Whether you are able to gain something valuable to you. Using Facebook, we know that we have to spend time. The time can be used for other alternatives. You can study, read a book, or spend some time with your friends, or go for have a good meal with your friends. And the benefit is you probably just enjoy the time of using Facebook. You can connect with some friends online and spend some time there, right? So whether it's a good choice to use Facebook now, you need to compare the corresponding cost, what you must have to give up, and what you gain. But that is not the end of the story yet. We need to compare cost and benefit, of course, but sometimes it's slightly more complicated than that. Because in the following situation, for example, how do you allocate the next hour between studying, listening to this lecture, and try to understand what economics is and how to make good economic decisions, and also checking Facebook? I know some of you may not be checking Facebook now, it may be TikTok or Instagram or checking social media in general, right? So here, the next hour, right, is not all or nothing. The choice is not all or nothing. You have to decide how much or how much time you want to allocate to each of those activities. Right? You can decide, right? So after this class, you want to spend maybe half an hour for studying, another half an hour for checking social media, right? So this is the idea of marginal thinking, right? We don't make decisions for all or nothing. We make the decision at the margin. In other words, we want to decide how much of two different allocation of your time and determine the quantity for each alternative. So marginal thinking evaluate whether the benefit of one more unit of something is greater than the cost. Right? So in what you are going to do is to consider at the case, so now I decide not to allocate any time for using Facebook. Well, maybe for this next hour, just studying may be boring. So maybe increasing this time for 1 minute. You consider that 1 more minute of using Facebook, the corresponding cost is this time, and the corresponding benefit is just enjoyment from the Facebook. Whether this marginal benefit that you derive from this 1 more minute of using this Facebook is greater than the corresponding cost. And then you decide whether to increase the amount of time by 1 minute. So that is the idea of marginal thinking, right? So rational choices would evaluate the consequences of making incremental changes, right? So let's formally introduce this concept of marginal, right? So marginal benefit is just the benefit of 1 more unit, and marginal cost is just the cost of 1 more unit. So that is telling us that when we try to make decisions, whether we want to increase this allocation of resources to one activity or not, would be dependent on the following decision rule. If the marginal benefit of allocating 1 more unit of the resources to alternative A is greater than the corresponding marginal cost of increasing this 1 more unit, then you want to increase that 1 more unit, right? So that is the idea of marginal thinking. It may seem quite abstract. So let me give you a concrete example to help you understand this idea, right? So see, let's assume that Warren really like eating lobster, right? And here it shows this corresponding marginal benefit of having 1 more lobster for Warren, right? So here you see that we just convert this corresponding marginal benefit to monetary value. So we measure this value as Danish kroner, as just using money to represent the corresponding value. And for the first lobster, Warren will be able to derive 300 Danish kroner worth of benefit. Right? For the second lobster, the corresponding marginal benefit will be less than the one derived from the first one. I mean, this is this idea of decreasing marginal benefit, right? So when you have more of anything, your benefit derived from this 1 more unit usually will be decreasing, right? So this is the idea of a decreasing marginal benefit. So that is something that we'll elaborate in our next lecture, right? And here we just, represent the corresponding marginal benefit. And we see that the corresponding marginal benefit would be decreasing as we increasing the corresponding amount of consumption, right? For the third lobster, Warren can only derive 100 Danish kroner as benefit. For the first one, it's only 50. And for the fifth one, I mean, he probably is already full stuffed, cannot take any more lobster. So the corresponding benefit is decreasing to 0. Now, let's assume that the price of a lobster is 200 Danish kroner. The question is, how many lobster will Warren buy? Think about this and consider the decision rule that we have introduced in the previous slide. Someone could tell me the answer. If you know the answer, you may be able to put the answer in this chat box or just unmute yourself and tell the classmates. What do you think? So that is the idea of marginal thinking. Let me see. We only consume 1. So we have, I guess the consensus now is having just 1 lobster, right? So that is a good answer. Let's just try to use this marginal thinking to see why having 1 lobster is good. I mean, because the corresponding marginal benefit of having one lobster is 300 Danish kroner, right? So then that means Warren would want to increase the consumption of lobster from 0 to 1, right? So the first one is definitely good. For the second one, well, the corresponding benefit and the cost are the same. So that means Warren is indifferent between whether to have the lobster or not, because the cost and benefit are exactly the same. So he can either consume it or not consume it. It will not influence his pleasure, right? So the first one is definitely for consumption. I mean, he will decide to consume the first one, but the second one, well, he's indifferent. So what we will do is to follow the rule in the textbook. We assume that if the marginal benefit is equal to the marginal cost, we just assume that the decision maker will still go ahead and increase that one more unit, right? So here we just assume that Warren, when the marginal benefit is exactly the same as the marginal cost, he will continue to consume this corresponding unit. So that means in this situation, Warren will consume 2, right? So this is just decision rule defined in the textbook. So in the rest of the textbook, the rest of the course, and in the exam, we just assume that if the marginal benefit is exactly the same as the marginal cost, the corresponding unit is consumed, is decided by the decision maker, right? So in reality, so this assumption is trivial. It doesn't matter, right? So because by taking this one more unit, it actually does not influence the pleasure derived from this consumption. Now, here is a more precise question that you have a definite answer. So what if the price of lobster is 60 kroner? How many lobsters would Warren purchase or consume? We use the same kind of reasoning, right? So the first lobster, Warren will be able to derive 300 Danish kroner as a benefit, but he only need to pay 60 kroner. Benefit is greater than cost, so he will definitely consume the first lobster. Maybe let me here. The first one will be consumed, right? Like we just like a check mark. The second one, the benefit is 200 and the cost is 60. 200 is greater than 60. So the second one is also consumed. The third one, benefits 100, cost is 60, 100 greater than 60. So the third one is also consumed. The fourth one, the benefit is 50, the cost is 60, is greater than 50. So cost is greater than benefit. So the first one is not consumed. So that means when the cost is 60, 3 lobsters will be consumed. And for the first one, 2 lobsters will be consumed, right? So here we assume that when, again, the benefits and the cost is exactly the same, we assume the decision maker will just go ahead to have that one more unit, just by assumption. Now, here is some discussion question for you to think about. Let me see whether you have any questions. Yeah, so it's great that everyone that submit the answer in the chat box have the correct answer. Another discussion question, do people eat more in an all-you-can-eat buffet restaurant compared to a regular restaurant? Why? Think about this. Again, if you have an answer, you can just unmute yourself and tell us what you think about this question. So while you are thinking, maybe let me show you another question, discussion question that have similar reasoning behind this idea of marginal thinking. A group of friends go for dinner together. Do you think they will order more if they evenly split the bill, or if each of them pay for their own food? Why? So I saw Casper is probably answering the first question. So I agree with him. Every plate will contribute to increased value. But that does not say why all you can eat restaurant you will eat more. Right? So we probably agree that you will go and eat more when you go to a buffet restaurant. Okay, so Dina have a great answer. Each additional item order increases the bill, make people more cautious about how much they eat, right? So this very good reasoning. So that is the idea of marginal thinking. In all-you-can-eat restaurant, the marginal cost of having an additional plate of food is zero, right? So you pay the fixed amount already at the beginning. So that means the marginal cost is zero. So that means when you in an all-you-can-eat restaurant, you will eat until the marginal benefit you get from this one more plate is zero, right? So that's the decision rule. But in a regular restaurant, any plate you order would incur some cost that you have to pay. That is the marginal cost, meaning that the marginal cost is not zero. So in that case, what you will do is to eat until the amount or the benefit you derive from the additional plate is the same as the price you pay, the marginal cost you pay for that plate. So that's why, right? You see, you probably also have the same feeling of the same experience when you go to all-you-can-eat restaurant, you will eat more because the marginal benefit is zero. Now, yeah, I see some of the very nice answers, right? So we're all consistent with this idea. Now consider the second scenario. A group of friends go for dinner when they evenly split the bill compared to the case when they pay for their own. Which situation do you think they will order more? I know some of you may be very generous person. You don't care a lot in these two situations, but marginally, we would reason that if they evenly split the bill, as Magnus just mentioned, they will eat more. Why is that the case? It's still consistent with this marginal thinking because the marginal cost of having another plate of food when you evenly split the bill is smaller compared to the case when you pay on your own, right? Because when you evenly split the bill, ordering an additional plate, suppose there are 4 people going to dinner for dinner together, then the marginal cost of that additional plate is just a quarter, 1/4 of the price you pay compared to when you just pay on your own. And because of this marginal thinking, right? So you will order more because the marginal cost will be lower in the first situation when you evenly split the bill, right? So these are just 2 real-life scenarios, all related to food, interestingly, to eating, to dining. But it illustrates this idea that we do make decisions according to this marginal reasoning in real life, right? And it also reminds us that we should take into this consideration of marginal cost and marginal benefit in order to make good decision. Right? So here is an interesting idea or interesting debate. So I think Adam Smith, when he wrote the book, the famous economic book, The Wealth of Nations, introduced this idea, which is more valuable among these two, water or diamond? What do you think? Depends on the situation. Peter have a really great answer. Diamond generally, but depends on the situation, right? So here, what situation does this value of water and diamond would be dependent on? Right? So let me reframe this question. Between a glass of water and glass of diamond, which would you choose? So this is, again, consistent with the idea of marginal thinking. Which to choose depends on the marginal benefit of water versus the marginal, let me see here. Yeah, depend on the marginal benefit of the water versus the marginal benefit of diamond, right? And also the marginal benefit would depend how much you already have. So that is the situation. We depend, the value would be dependent on. Right? So like Magnus mentioned, in survival situation, you would choose the water rather than the diamond. So that means in survival situation where when you left alone in the desert, one glass of water is definitely more valuable than one glass of diamond. Why is that the case? Well, because in survival situation, you do not have a lot of water, and you need water for your survival. The marginal benefit of one glass of water in that case is extremely large, right? So then in that situation, you will prefer a glass of water compared to a glass of diamond. But in most of situation, in regular everyday situation, I mean, I will definitely choose a glass of diamond. Why? Because water is abundant. When I have almost all the water I want to drink, the marginal benefit of one additional glass of water is so minimal. I don't care about another glass of water because I can just go to the tap, get another glass of water, right? So I would definitely choose and prefer a glass of diamond. So this is again marginal thinking, right? So the marginal value of anything would depend upon how much that thing you already own. If you have already owned a lot of those things, then one additional unit of that item is worth very little to you. It has very low marginal benefit. But if you are in a situation that you have very rare quantity of the corresponding items, then you probably would place a higher marginal benefit. So this, again, the comparison of the value of water and diamond, or say the paradox of value, can be solved using this idea of marginal value. Right? Now, so that is the idea. When you try to make a decision, you compare the marginal benefit with the marginal cost, and you choose to go for that action if the corresponding marginal benefit is greater than or equal to marginal cost. So that's the first economic way of thinking. Now, an exercise to summarize what we have discussed. With regards to marginal thinking, an individual will do an action if, so consider which of the following four situations is true. Right? Again, you can just using your laptop, go to the website here, poapp.com/my first name, or scan this QR code here to submit your answer. So the answer should be straightforward after what we have discussed. Sorry. So if you have paid any attention to what we have discussed so far, so D is the correct answer, right? So that is just directly the restatement of we have discussed, right? So it's the decision rule for rational choice. The other three are all wrong. The probability of success is greater than 50%. I mean, so that doesn't mean the corresponding benefit is greater than the corresponding cost, right? So the action has positive benefit. Well, a lot of action have positive benefit, but it's not the reason to decide whether that action is a good action. You have to also consider the corresponding cost of taking that action, right? So, for example, go and rob a bank. The corresponding benefit is high, but also the corresponding cost is also very high. So that's why it's not a good idea. And the cost of the actions are small. Again, sometimes the cost of the action is very small, but if you don't derive any benefit from it, it's also a really bad decision to make, right? So that's why D is the correct answer. So that is our first way of economic thinking. Now the second way, choices respond to incentives. So here we will introduce this important concept called incentives. In economics, the idea of incentives is quite important. So an incentive is just another fancy word for a reward or a penalty. If the incentive is positive, then that is a reward. When the incentive is negative, then we are talking about a penalty, right? So choices we make would depend on the incentives we face, right? So that's why sometimes we see there's this carrot and stick, right? So when you try to ask someone to do something, you can either use the carrot, meaning that you provide some reward, or you use stick. That means you just provide some punishment if that one decides not to do something, right? So this is a good illustration. So we either use a carrot or use a stick to stimulate the horse to move forward. So that means we need to provide incentives for other people in order to persuade them in order to do something. So because of this, a quite direct observation of all kinds of economic phenomena is that whenever the incentives of people changed, there will be a corresponding change of the relative cost and compared to the benefit. And because there is a change in the relative cost and benefit, there will be some change in the choices, because we know that people would make decision by comparing the cost and benefit. When you change incentives, you change the corresponding cost and benefit, and that would lead to a change in choices, right? So this idea, people respond to incentives, will help us to explain a very wide range of economic and social phenomena, right? So here is one interesting example. Charles Dickens and Ernest Hemingway. So if you like literature, you probably know that they have very different writing styles, right? Charles Dickens would actually write really long fictions, long novels. So like The Tales of Two Cities is like a very thick book, take you maybe several weeks to finish. But Hemingway write really short, really concise novels, but both two authors produce very famous artworks that people enjoy. You might have not thought about how the incentives actually partially, at least partially, shaped their writing style, right? So if you look at the incentives these two authors face, Dickens actually received payment each time he produces 32 pages of text. So that gave him an incentive to actually write really long novels, right? So he just write these novels several pages and maybe publish some in the newspaper so people can read. And then he just write it again next week to publish somewhere. So he want to prolong this storyline so that he can write a lot in order to earn additional payment. Well, Hemingway was not paid based on length of what he have written. So, I mean, that partially shaped the writing style, right? So you might not have thought that incentives, a quite important economic concept, could actually explain different writing styles. Now, here is a quite interesting example. A decade ago or a couple of decades ago, there was a famous book called Freakonomics, right? So that talk about how incentives change people's behavior. And this is one of the examples mentioned in that book. And it actually some personal stories of the authors of that book. So we will see how incentives or providing incentives, I mean, that change people's behavior, but sometimes it could lead to unintended consequences.
Interview pose, and now you're lying down, swinging a pillow around. What's going on here? If I give you a slice of juicy fruit, will you say whatever I want?
No.
No. Wait, I heard that you would do anything for a slice of juicy fruit.
No matter how smart you are, and economists think they're pretty smart, you come up with some incentive scheme that you think is the perfect one to entice exactly the behavior you have in mind. And you set an army of people with nothing to do all day but to figure out how to beat that incentive scheme, and they absolutely will beat
tell
it.
them about Amanda.
It's such a long story. You can't possibly. I mean, I'll give you an example. So we were trying to potty train my daughter Amanda, and My wife went into books and did all the things you're supposed to do, but Amanda had been potty trained, and then she just decided she just wouldn't use the toilet anymore. And this went on for months. My wife was frustrated. And I said, I'm an economist. I understand incentives. Let me take over. And I got right down on Amanda's level on my knees, and I knew what she liked more than anything else. She was about 3 years old. Were M&Ms. And I said, if you go pee-pee in the potty, I'll give you a bag of M&Ms. She said, right now? And I said, yeah. I said, okay. And she walked over to the potty. She went to the bathroom. I turned to my wife, and I said, let the economist handle this, And indeed, for the next couple of days, it worked to perfection. Every time she had to go to the bathroom, she announced it. She went to the bathroom. There was a lot of fanfare. We gave her the M&Ms. Everything was going great. But 3 days later, she said, well, I have to go to the bathroom. Followed her. She went, trickled out a few drops. I gave her the M&Ms. She got off. She said, I have to go again. She sat down in the potty. She trickled a few more drops. I gave her the M's. Gotta go again. Basically, in 3 days, she had gone from someone who could absolutely no bladder control to being so, so professional at it that she could control the flow completely at a whim, and had a 3-year-old had basically come up with a way to beat the incentive scheme I had developed within 3 days that I never in a million years could have imagined. Okay, and if you can't, if an economist can't trick a 3-year-old for more than 3 days, what hope does economists have of tricking a whole country of people for even 3 hours?
So that's kind of the beauty of incentives. You don't really know what works, and governments think they know what works, and they spend a huge amount of resources establishing incentives. And they're gonna do all these things that seem to make a lot of sense and that sound really great and may work out well in some measure, but they're gonna backfire in so many different ways that we can't predict yet. And people will laugh and people will cry, and that's what incentives are.
Okay, so that is a
Interview
great
code.
example of unintended consequences. So you see that even a 3-year-old can actually just trick this incentive scheme and get some benefit out of it, right? So that is the idea of unintended consequences. So all kinds of policies, when we talk about those policies that imposed by the government or by the company, they might have some unintended consequences. Policies always change incentives, and this change incentives, sometimes, of course, you want to change the incentives to achieve a certain goal, but sometimes it will be able to result in some unintended consequences, right? So here is a funny illustration, right? You just want to push this block, but this block would eventually just come back to you, right? So the example of this writing style is just some unintended consequence, right? So you don't want these authors probably to respond to this incentive in how long they write. Irina just actually mentioned another example. This Mayakovsky also get paid for every line he write as a poem. So that's why he wrote a very long poem with just 1 to 3 words in every line, right? So that's something maybe not that detrimental to the society, but in actuality, when we look at the policies imposed by the government, it would lead to some very unexpected, unintended consequences. So that would achieve some consequence not intended, and sometimes it's even detrimental to the initial and opposite to what is initially intended. So here is an interesting example of unintended consequence. So, low birth rate is an issue, right, throughout the developed countries, including Denmark. So Australia, influenced by this issue of low birth rate, the government decided to give some baby bonus, right, to encourage people giving birth, to increase the birth rate. So the baby bonus is 3,000 Australian dollars, and it will be imposed and become effective after the 1st of July 2014. And here is the evolution of birth rate over time, right before and right after the 1st of July in the year which this policy was imposed. So on the x-axis, the horizontal axis, it represents the corresponding time. We see that the 1st of July is here, right? And y-axis, the height of the curve, represent the number of births, right? And each data point represents the number of births in each week. So if we look at the trend, before and after, we look at the average birth number and the average birth number after, we will see there is some increase. Right? So it shows the effectiveness of this policy. But one interesting observation is what happens right before and right after. So here is the number of births right before the policy was effective and right after. What we have observed here, and why do you think this occurred? We definitely see some unintended consequences here. It's not something that the government would like to see. So keep this puzzle in mind, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes to continue our discussion, and we will see more examples of unintended consequences. So all these phenomena of unintended consequences is telling us that whenever we want to make a new policy, we need to think about not just the direct influence of the policy, but we also should look for carefully whether it would lead to some unintended consequences, right, that we don't want to see. Sometimes when a policy is announced or want to be implemented, in order to avoid the unintended consequences, you probably want to keep the announcement very close to the effective date. So like this unemployment benefit change in Denmark that occurred 10 years ago, it was actually announced only 1 month before, right? So that the unintended consequences will be minimized. So here, if the baby bonus was announced a long time ago, people would actually make their planning about this, the coming of their babies in order to receive this baby bonus. You might think that 3,000 Australian dollars is not a lot, but especially for the poor people, it's actually a great incentives for them to have this baby, right? So for people who are planning their baby, I mean, they would want to postpone if the expectation date, the due date, is actually before the 1st of July, so that if they are able to plan long term, they will try to have their baby right after. And also, there are all kinds of techniques that will help you to actually to postpone the delivery date of your baby, right? So, for example, I know that if the mother have this type 3 diabetes, right? So usually the doctor would recommend to have this early delivery because the baby would actually just grow too big and make both the mother and the baby dangerous if it's delivered after due date. But if there's this new baby bonus, I mean, such mothers may decide, right, in order to receive this baby bonus, they want to postpone. They don't want to have this stimulation to have this birth or delivery date before this effective date. So these are all kinds of unintended consequences, and this is something that the government probably does not want to see, right? So because this deliberate postponement of delivery may be dangerous to the mother and to the baby, right? So that is one example of unintended consequences. And here is an example of unintended consequences in athletics. So here is an example of Babka, Sergei Babka, who's Ukraine, but he served for the former Soviet Union in all kinds of competitions, including Olympics. So Soviet Ukraine pole vaulter, Babka actually broke his own outdoor world record 16 times and the indoor world record 17 times. I mean, he held the record of the largest number of breaking the world records. So you might be wonder, maybe he just so good to have this so many times of record breaking, but it turns out that it's partially, at least partially, but sometimes you can argue that it's majorly influenced by the Soviet Union's policy, because Soviet Union provided this cash reward to their athletics who broke the world record, including the record achieved by themselves, right? So that gives a very strong incentive for Babka to actually intentionally break the record, but only break the record for the minimum amount of height so that in the future, he's again able to break the record, right? So that is some unintended consequences, right? So if the government provide the incentive not for just breaking the record, but also based on the amount or the magnitude of record breaking, I mean, it probably would change the history. I mean, he probably would not just break the record more than 30 times in total. So that's one example, interesting example of unintended consequences in athletics. Now, here are some quite interesting stories. So, in ancient time, in the 19th century, the European paleontologists, they actually try to get these fossils in China, right? These fossils are quite valuable for conducting research and to understand the ancient times. So the researchers, the paleontologists, they actually pay the villagers by the number of bone fragments that they bring to them. Right? So you probably would imagine what are the unintended consequences in this case. Right? Because of this special payment structure, it creates the incentives for the villagers to bring a large number of bone fragments. So that means many villagers, they will just smash the bone to increase the number of pieces they could sell so that they are able to get this large amount of money. But this is contradictory to the intention of the researcher, because a complete bone, would be much more valuable compared to a fractured bone, right? Even if they are of the same size. But because of this badly designed payment scheme, it actually creates this distorted incentives for the villagers and leads to these unintended consequences that not expected by the paleontologists. So that is a very painful story, very painful example. And here is another example, Indian cobra. So during the British rule of the colonial India, British government actually offered a bounty for every dead cobra in Delhi. So now, considering all the previous example, can you try to imagine or try to predict what had happened because of this policy? People bred cobras, exactly. So as Peter mentioned, eventually people would start a business, right? So enterprising people would begin to breed cobra for their income, because if you have cobra and you bring them and you bring it just to the government, they will be able to give you the money. You will earn money from it, right? So similar incidents occurred in Hanoi, Vietnam, under this French colonial rule. So the French government, when they ruled Vietnam, they actually announced this policy in Hanoi that whenever people turn in the tails of rats, they will get paid, right? So they want people to kill rats because it's just so detrimental to the crops and influence the yields from the field. So they want the rats to be killed and to help this agriculture in Hanoi. But the French government, of course, they do not want the dead rats to pile up in the government. So what they want is, or what they asked is, instead of turning in the dead rats, they actually ask people to turn in the tails, just the tails, to show that a rat has been killed, so that they will get paid. But the unintended consequence is that now you see a lot of rats running around without the tails, right? Because the villagers in Hanoi, they just cut the tails, right? So because the tail would give you the reward, why bother and kill the rats? So that's, again, a quite interesting example of unintended consequences. So these stories, these phenomena, is just telling us that new laws and policies would often have unintended consequences when people react to the change incentives, right? So here are some general observations. Free healthcare generates more patients, right? So holding all other things equal, if going to see a doctor is free, you don't need to pay any money, then more people will just go to the doctors, right? So this is in direct comparison to the case that you have to pay a huge amount of money. So in Denmark, right? So you go to the doctors is completely free, although sometimes you need to wait for a long time to be able to see the doctor. In the United States, this distorted healthcare system, right? You have to pay a huge amount. Even getting an ambulance, right? It will cost you thousands of dollars. I mean, that's actually insane. That would actually make a lot of people decide not to go to the sick doctors. When they become sick, they just try to get healthy again by themselves, by their immune system. So this comparison, holding all other things equal, whether you pay to see the doctor versus you pay a huge amount of money to see the doctor, I mean, that would actually lead to a very dramatic difference in the number of patients you see. Right? So that's why we say that free healthcare generates more patients, because sometimes, if it's free, I mean, if you're just concerned about something, I mean, you don't think it's nothing serious, just to be safe, you just go to see the doctor. I mean, that would actually cost a lot of resources, right? So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but you should be aware of these unintended consequences. Social Security to the poor, this Social Security, meaning that this compensation or payment stipend to the poor would increase the number of poor people, because holding all other things equal, if becoming poor will get you some money, I mean, you'd rather stay poor, right? So if you don't get any compensation for being poor, you probably will try harder to get out of poverty, right? Of course, this is just some incentives. What I said is holding all other things equal. Like in Denmark, even though there are social securities or the compensations to the poor people, but the Danish population, as in general, they have a good work ethics. I mean, they actually would want to work more, and also they want to work hard in order to get rich. So that's also the mindset would matters. But holding all other things equal, Social Security to poor would increase the number of poor people. Unemployment benefit or unemployment insurance would increases the incidence of unemployment, because now if you get unemployed, you will be able to get some compensation, right? But again, I'm not saying that unemployment insurance is a bad policy. I just want to point out that there are some unintended consequences. Unemployment insurance is very important because it gives people the assurance that they can wait and look for a job that best fit their interests and skills, right? But at the same time, we need to pay attention to the unintended consequences. High taxations on the rich decreases the number of rich people, right? So this is just give some incentives or punishment to the rich people if the tax rate they have to pay is higher. I mean, they either decide not to bother that much to earn a lot of money, or they just relocate to another country with low tax rate, right? So these are unintended consequences, right? High taxation, of course, is good for this welfare state, like in Denmark and in other Scandinavian countries. But at the same time, there are some unintended consequences. Of course, I'm saying holding all other things equal, but in Scandinavian countries, people have this good work ethic. The rich people, I mean, even though the tax rate is very high, they are still willing to work hard. Most of the entrepreneurs, for example, they work not just for the money. They also work to consider this contribution to the society, right? But also, we need to be aware of the unintended consequences. Holding all other things equal, if you impose a high tax rate, people would work less hard compared to the case when the tax rate is not as high. So when we think about policies imposed by the government, sometimes the costs of policies are often underestimated. Right? For example, to gain votes, politicians often ignore the long-term consequences and emphasize the claimed goals. I mean, this is something that we see. Like we know that Trump just won the new presidency and just became the new president. And when we have this electoral system and you only stay in office for 4 years or 5 years, some of the policies you make, you focus on this short-term benefit you receive for your presidency, right? You don't think too much about the long-term consequences. Right? And also, policies should be discussed and evaluated not only by their goals, but also the incentives and consequences they create. So this is a very important lesson that we can learn from these first 2 classes of this course. Policies should be discussed and evaluated not only by their goals, right? So I repeat that because it's very important. When we look at the policies, they all have good goals, but it's not enough to just have good intention. We also need to consider the consequences, especially the unintended consequences that might incur by imposition of this corresponding policy, right? So in order to understand that, we need to understand the economic mechanism behind the policy, how the policy would change the corresponding incentives and change the behaviors of people, and how people would react to the policy. So that is indispensable for us to understand and to evaluate the full effect of any policy. Right? So again, that would conclude our discussion of the 2 economic way of thinking. Try to recall the first economic way of thinking is rational choice would compare benefit and cost to reach a decision, a good decision. And also, it's not just compare any cost and benefit. Sometimes when we need to decide the amount to relocate to different alternatives, we need to compare the marginal benefit and the marginal cost in order to determine whether to do anything and how much we want to do anything. And the second economic way of thinking is that people respond to incentives. Incentives represent reward and punishment of any choice, and all policies would change the incentive, and that would in turn change the cost and benefit faced by the decision maker, faced by people, and that would in turn change their behaviors. So for all policies, there will be some consequences. And what we need to focus on is not just the direct goals, intentions, on the explicit consequence of the policy. We also need to look at the unintended consequences in order to correctly evaluate the effect of any policy, right? So that is the second topic of today's lecture. Now we want to get into some, introduce some new concepts, factors of production, and also we will define 2 different type of statement, or say 2 different type of analysis. So the factors of production, we just introduced, is 4 different factors. Factors of productions just represent the productive resources that produce goods and services. And we talk about goods and services all the time, but what are they? They are just objects people value and produce to satisfy human wants, right? All kinds of goods, cups, computers, pens, all these things that we use and we value can be considered as goods. Service is also something that you produce, right? But it's not concrete good. Like when I teach now, I'm providing or producing service, teaching service. I'm passing knowledge from what I have learned to you. That can be considered as services, because you place value on my teaching, so that can be considered as services. When you travel to somewhere, there will be some travel guide, tourism guide, and that also can be considered as services. So factors of productions, right, that produce these corresponding goods and services can be grouped into 4 different categories. The first one is called land. So land is not just land we use or build buildings. It represents all kinds of natural resources, meaning that not only the land, but the resources that contained on the land, like minerals, oil, water, trees, all these things can be considered as land. So land, you can just consider that as another word for natural resources. Labor is something that what people provide. Like what I'm doing now is providing my labor to produce the service to you. Capital is something that that is used for producing more goods and services. And entrepreneurship is just what entrepreneur produce, their including their intelligence, their human capital, right? So here are the definitions, formal definitions of these four different factors. Land represents natural resources. Another name for this is just gifts of nature, right? So sometimes when you see some countries like Iceland have a good natural resource like fish, right? So that is just a gift of gift of nature. It's important to have good gifts of nature, but it's, as we will see, that it's not the single most important determinant for economic development. Like Japan has really limited natural resources, but for the years, for the decades after World War II, it enjoyed and can observe this great economic development. Why is that? Because land is just one factor of production. The other factor of productions sometimes are more important compared to natural resources. Labor is just one such factor. Labor is just the time and effort that people devote. The quality of labor depends on human capital, right? What do we mean by human capital? We talk about human capital all the time. Human capital just refers to the knowledge and skill that people obtain from education and experience. To some extent, what you are doing now by listening to me lecturing here is just trying to increase your knowledge and increase your skill so that in the future you are able to produce more goods and services to contribute to the society. In other words, you are trying to invest in your human capital. You try to increase your levels of human capital. Now, capital just refers to the tools, instruments, machines, buildings, and other constructions that are used to produce goods and services. So some of you might have some confusion. Before taking economics, you may think that capital refers to this financial capital, because in finance, whenever we talk about capital, that is just another word for money. But in economics, when we talk about capital, I mean, we are talking about this capital in the word capitalism, right? Capitalism is just you invest in capitals and use the capital as the main driver for economic growth. In capitalism, capital refers to the tools, instrument, machine buildings that you invest in order to produce more goods and services. So that is the definition of capital. Entrepreneurship is just another type of human resource. It is the human resource that organizes land, labor, and capital, right? So you have land, you have labor, you have a capital, but that is not enough. You need to have someone to decide what to produce. And that is the role played by entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs just find some opportunity in the society that you can create value. Then you try to hire land, hire labor, invest in capital, or build a company, start a company to produce the things that the society would value. Right? So here are the incomes earned by different factors of production. When you own land, including all the resources, you earn the so-called rent. So rent is just a general term in economics, representing the things that you can get from owning natural resources. Right? It's not just the rent you pay for leasing out your building. It's just different concept. Now, labor, the earnings of labor, we call it wages. So when I teach, I earn salary. So the wages I got is just the compensation for my labor. Capital earn interest. Again, this interest is not just the interest you get from depositing money in your bank. It's a general term referred to the earnings from capital. And entrepreneurship earns profit. What is profit? Is this something that we'll discuss later? Profit is something that when you start a business and you earn the revenue, of course, after your revenue, you need to pay your laborers you hire as wage. You need to pay for renting the capitals to the owners of the capital, and also you need to pay to get the natural resources. What is left is the profit, right? So the profit can be negative. That means you're suffering economic loss. When the profit is positive, then you earn a positive profit, meaning that you are running a successful business, right? So capital, the profit is something that after getting rid of getting all the other factors of production paid, what is left is called profit. It's something that the owners of business would get, right, from the business. So these are just 4 different types of incomes attributed to 4 different types of factors of production, right? So the incomes earned by these 4 different factors, I mean, if you own whole human capital, you earn wages. If you own natural resources, you earn the rent. You own capitals, or you own business. All this would be counted as the income for you. And the income, when you own, is then used to purchase goods and services. So that is the circle of the whole economy, right? So when you earn some income, then you spend on goods and services. When the spending on the goods services would become as the revenue of the company. And the revenue would be distributed towards the different factor of production, pay the natural resources, pay the labor as wage, pay the capital as interest, and what is left is for the entrepreneur as the profit, right? So that count as the whole circle of the economy. So that is the definition for the 4 factors of production and the corresponding incomes earned by these different factors. Now, we are ready to introduce another important concept. It is positive versus normative statement. So when we talk about economics, we say that economics is a social science. Social science is just study social phenomena, the phenomena that involve people. And economists, because it's study social science, we call economists as a social scientist. Right? So economists would distinguish 2 different types of statement. Positive statement versus normative statement. Positive statement represent what can be tested and validated. So it's just a description of what it is. In comparison, normative statement is just an opinion that cannot be really tested or validated. It just describes what ought to be, what is supposed to be. It's prescriptive, right? So it's just, I'm telling you that you should do this. That is normative statement. I'm telling you that economics is a science. That is a positive statement, right? So this statement can be tested, right? So in this class, and including the textbook, we are most concerned with positive analysis and positive statement. So in other words, our focus throughout this course is trying to help you understand how the economy worked, what it is going on in the economy, right? We will talk about some normative statements, discuss what is supposed to be done, but our focus is just trying to telling you what it is and trying to understand the economic phenomena. So that is the definition, distinguishing positive versus normative statement. Now, a practice. So the distinction between these 2 types of statements should be straightforward. Like here, rich people should be taxed more. Is this a positive or normative statement? Normative, nice. So yeah, Lila just mentioned rich people should be taxed. When you see should, ought to, is supposed to, I mean, this is just trying to expressing an opinion. These are normative statements. More taxes on the rich will increase tax revenue. It's trying to describe a phenomena, right? This phenomena can be right or wrong, but you can test it using the data. Right? You can see whether it's correct or not. But any statement, whether correct or not, that is a positive statement. So I guess every one of you should be able to get this idea, right? So everyone should donate to charity. Normative. Government intervention in market is bad. It's a description. It's positive, right? And economics majors earn more on average than sociology majors. It's not an opinion saying that what is supposed to be done. It's just a description, and we can validate whether this is true or not. So that is, again, a positive statement, right? So, I mean, the distinction should be straightforward. And throughout this course, will be mostly focusing on positive analysis. We will try to describe what is, and we'll describe when the policy is there, what are the corresponding consequences, and whether we are supposed to impose that policy or not. So that's a normative analysis we will touch little upon, right? So you need to use a lot of knowledge outside of economics to pose normative suggestions. So that's why it's you can consider that as tricky. I mean, philosophers, sociologists, they will consider normative suggestions are important, but in economics, in this course, we'll try to focus on positive analysis. And now the last concept that I want to introduce. So in this course, we talk about the course name is business and market. I'm trying to recall the English name, works on economy. So when we talk about business and market, we are actually focusing on this microeconomics, right? Later, I mean, I believe it's the next semester, you will have another 1 or 2 economic courses that will cover macroeconomics and international economics. So it's helpful for us to distinguish these different types of economics now, so that you are prepared to understand what is expected in this course and in later courses related to economics. So the major difference I want to tell you is the distinction between micro versus macro. Micro meaning something small, right? So I think it's a Greek word. Microeconomics just studies choices of individuals and businesses, right? And how they interact in market, and also including the role played by the government. But the focus is individual and business, including the firms, and the role played by the government, right? So here are some questions that microeconomics will be able to answer. How do taxes on cigarettes influence its demand? So that is a question answered by microeconomics or microeconomists. How do rent control influence the supply of apartments in Copenhagen? That's an analysis of government policy. That is microeconomics. How should Apple price their iPhone? I mean, this is a question related to the pricing strategy of a company, of a firm. That is, again, the focus of microeconomics. Now, let's shift our focus to a broader perspective. Macroeconomics, macro is another name for big, right? So macroeconomics studies the performance of the national and global economy. So the questions is macro is broad. So here are some examples. What is the GDP of Denmark this year? We will not give a definition of GDP, so this is just a measure. I'll just briefly introduce this idea. GDP is just a measure of how much goods and services produced in the country, right? So what is the GDP of Denmark this year? So that is a macro perspective. You try to understand the economy of Denmark as a whole. So that's a topic or question answered by macroeconomics. And what is the interest rate should the central bank set? Interest rate is a topic included in macroeconomics because the interest rate set by the central bank would not influence just one individual business or one individual household. It would influence the whole economy. What does unemployment rate fluctuate? Why does the unemployment rate fluctuate? Right. So now again, we are not considering one unemployed person in a household or the status of one company. We are trying to understand the general unemployment rate in the whole economy. And does COVID-19 cause a recession in Europe? So that's, again, recession, depression, inflation, all these things are phenomena at the macroeconomic level, and those are topics studied by macroeconomics. So that means all these questions are something that we will not answer in this course. You will need to wait for next semester to have understanding of the answers to these questions. Our focus is microeconomics. Right? So that's almost conclude our course for today. So to summarize, in the past 2 weeks, we have give a course introduction and again give a definition of economics. So economics study how individuals and society cope with scarcity. Right? And because of scarcity, we have limited resources, and we have to decide how to allocate those resources. So that means we have to face trade-offs whenever we make a choice. And the choice is a trade-off, and any choice would imply a sacrifice, a cost. And in economics, we define cost or as opportunity cost, what you must have to give up in order to implement one choice. And then two economic ways of thinking. Rational choice compare marginal benefits and marginal costs. And rational choice would imply that you will make that action or choose that alternative when the corresponding marginal benefit is greater than or equal to marginal cost. And also we learned that choice respond to incentives. So this is a very insightful observation because that is telling us that whenever we evaluate any policy, we should not only focus on its goals, its intentions, we also need to look at the corresponding consequences, especially unintended consequences, in order to have a good evaluation of the policy. And then we introduce some concepts that would lay the foundation for our later topics. We introduced the idea of factors of production. So these factors of production would produce goods and services and generate income. So try to recall the 4 different types of factor of production. And then we talk about the difference between positive versus normative analysis. And in this course, we will mainly focus on positive analysis, right? Okay, so that is the end of today's discussion. Because it's online, I did not relocate a lot of time for discussion, so we could end ahead of time, right? But I will stay here for another 10 minutes in case you have any questions. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of the day. And I will post this recording of today's lecture on eLearning so that you can have a review if you want. Okay, thanks for your attention. I will see you next Wednesday, and we'll be back to normal to physical lecturing next week. Thanks.